Ensure a minimum air gap of 25 mm between the insulation and the breather membrane. Ensure a minimum air gap of 50 mm between the insulation and the felt. Pull the insulation taut and staple to the rafters using galvanized staples of a minimum length of 14 mm. Overlap the insulation from 50 to 100 mm at each joint and staple every 50 mm onto the rafter. Cover all the joints with Actis isoadhesive tape to give it an airtight finish. Fold all finishing edges under by a minimum of 50 mm and staple every 50 mm or trap with a final batten. Cut the strip to length, leaving an overhang of at least 5 cm. Also staple the 2 returns to the rafters. Pull insulation taut and staple it to the rafters every 30 cm. If you have to form an overlap between 2 rafters, provide for an intermediate support. Staple every 5 cm around the perimeter of the insulation. The overlapping insulation has to be 5 to 10 centimeters astride the intermediate support or the rafter. Pull the insulation taut and staple it at the overlap every 5 centimeters to make it airtight. Make sure the installation is airtight by applying isoadhesive tape and by fixing a batten to the return of the insulator at the purlins. Cut off any insulation protruding beyond the batten. It is important to ensure an air gap of at least 20 mm is provided. This is important for the insulation to perform properly. The first strip is laid starting from the top of the roof. Allow a return of at least 5 centimeters and staple the insulator every 5 centimeters. Staple under the rafters every 30 centimeters. Always pull the insulator taut. To ensure total airtightness along the longitudinal edges of the insulation, it must be stapled to a wooden support. To do this, attach spacers between the rafters at the overlapping point. it may sometimes be difficult to install spacers. In this case, install a thin batten under the rafters at the overlap point. The second strip must overlap by at least 5 centimeters and be stapled every 5 centimeters. Pull the insulation perfectly taut over the entire surface. At the starting edge, overlap the product. Staple the overlapped edge every 5 centimeters. At the starting edges, attach the batten to ensure airtightness. Any excess insulation will be cut away using an Actis special cutter. Iso-adhesive tape ensures that the insulation joints are airtight. If the finishing material is plasterboard, ensure an air gap of 20 mm minimum between insulation and the plasterboard. Fix vertical wooden battens on every rafter. Then attach the plasterboard. First, attach the spacers to the lightweight batten between the rafters, which will be used as a support for stapling the insulation. Roll out the insulation over the rafters in the direction of the slope. At eaves, ensure the insulation layers are not left exposed. Fold insulation and staple it to the lightweight batten spacers to ensure airtightness and tightness against accidental runoff water. There must be at least 10 centimeters overlap with stapling every 5 centimeters. On the perimeter, secure a retaining staple every 30 centimeters. Strip overlaps must be at least 10 centimeters at the rafter. Staple every 5 centimeters at the overlap. To obtain good airtightness and protection from accidental runoff water, carefully rub down the iso-adhesive tape with a damp cloth. Attach counter battens vertically, ensuring an air gap of 20 mm between the insulation and the roofing membrane. Lay the first strip along the bottom of the slope. Pull the insulation taut and staple it to the rafters every 30 centimeters. After attaching a batten to the bottom of the slope between the rafters, form an insulation return and staple it to the spacers to ensure airtightness and prevent against ingress of accidental runoff water. Insulation joints must be fixed to a wooden support. To achieve this, attach spacers between the rafters. Strips must overlap by at least 10 centimeters. Pull the insulation taut and staple it to the spacer every 5 centimeters. First attach a batten against the gable end. Staple the insulation to the rafter along the gable end. The insulation will be held by a counterlintel attached to the rafter. Form an insulation return to ensure good air tightness and staple it every 5 centimeters to the batten. Then attach a batten to improve air tightness. To finish, batten horizontally, ensuring an air gap of 20 millimeters between the insulation and the weather membrane. Trace the location of the overlapping batten with a center distance of 1.5 meters measured from the batten at the bottom of the slope, and position the intermediate battens every 50 centimeters. An unventilated air gap of at least 20 millimeters must be formed between the insulation and the roof battens to guarantee that the Actis insulation works properly. This air gap is obtained by laying horizontal battens. Lay the first strip working up from the bottom of the slope. Roll out the insulation over the battens, staple one of the side edges, then stretch the insulation and attach the other edge. Place one retaining staple every 30 centimeters. On the perimeter, stapling will be every 5 centimeters. Strip overlaps must be at least 10 centimeters over the batten. Staple every 5 centimeters, taking care to pull the insulation taut. To obtain total air tightness and protection from accidental runoff water, carefully rub down the ice-adhesive tape with a damp cloth. Lay the second batten vertically and allowing a minimum air gap of 20 millimeters between insulation and the membrane. Mark out the overlapping batten application with a center distance of 1.5 meters. Attach the intermediate battens with plugs every 50 centimeters. Ensure that there are enough plugs to ensure solid attachment to the wall. The first strip is laid starting from the top and allowing for an overlap with the second strip astride the batten. After stapling every 5 centimeters at the top, pull the insulation taut and staple it to the intermediate battens every 30 centimeters. Around the perimeter, it is essential to provide for insulation tightness returns around the battens and at the top. Form an overlap of 5 to 10 centimeters on the perimeter of the strip near a batten. Staple the overlap every 5 centimeters and then pull the insulation taut over the other vertical battens and staple it. On the perimeter, it is essential to provide for insulation tightness on returns around the battens and at the top. For improved air tightness, use iso-adhesive tape over the overlapped insulation. At the top and bottom of the wall, air tightness is ensured by nailing a batten to the vertical battens. Wainscoting finishing can be obtained by installing vertical or horizontal battens and allowing a minimum air gap of 20 millimeters.